If somebody could verify that indeed I'm streaming, and I'll stream the entire screen. Hide. Okay, it's broadcasting, right? Right. Just let me know if it's not broadcasting. All right, so let's keep working on a couple of experiments, introducing some new topics about ASPX. Let me open up the project that we're working on. It's the essentials. We were under CS5610. Is that correct? Experiments and then ASPX. There we go. All right, so where were we? Okay, we were here. We're about to look at create something very simple, just a very simple page that would allow us to do very simple interaction. Just ask us for two numbers and see if we could add them together. All right, so let's play around with that. Okay, so one of the things that we introduced was the notion that this new attribute called @server, right? That's a new attribute that the .NET, Microsoft.NET, ASP.NET framework enhances HTML, right? It adds behavior that was not there originally, right? If we remove the run at server and we execute this, we'll notice that here we have our two input fields, A and B, right? If I submit this and it gets submitted, notice that the data that I type gets lost, right? It's lost, and that's the default behavior, right? There is the HTML is a stateless protocol. There's no way for the browser to distinguish me from anyone else, right? I'm sorry, for the server to distinguish you visiting a page from someone else visiting a page, right? There's no way for it to maintain a conversation, to remember anything, right? As far as the server is concerned, every time you visit a page, it's the very first time that you came there, right? So that's a very limiting behavior. So what .NET does is that it adds additional behavior if you tell it that this is this input field, right? This input field where you can type is going to be maintained not by the browser, it's going to be maintained by the server. The server is going to inject certain things into the HTML so that the server can remember that it's you who's in a conversation with, right? So it's be able to remember the state of the conversation, right? Anything that you've submitted to me before, it'll remember what you have submitted, right? So if we refresh, right, and now if we type, and we submit the page, notice that now it does remember, right? It does remember. It does remember. So it remembers that it's you. Oh, yeah, you had submitted this data, right? So I remember that you did submit this, as opposed to just starting brand new and saying, oh, who are you? I don't know you, okay? Anyway, right. Let me add that. Let me stop that. Let's enhance that a little bit. But let's use one of the easier. Let's introduce one of the simplest components that ASPX introduced. Did we talk about labels? I forget. No. Okay. So what happens is that .NET, not going beyond just the plain old controls, input fields, and text boxes, and buttons, and whatnot that HTML gives us to create our own pages, it builds on that, right? And it can generate them to be much more useful, right, with much more functionality, right? And what it does is that it creates its own library of controls, right? So let's look at the very first control, one of the simplest control, the label control. So instead of using the HTML label, that's the HTML label, right? What we're going to look at is ASP's version of the label control, right? All the controls that are part of the library, the ASP library, they all start with the namespace ASP, right? And this is so that you can distinguish them from a regular label as opposed to an ASP label, right? Meaning this is a much more powerful label, not the plain vanilla label that comes with HTML. Okay, so the label control, right? They all the ASP controls need to be told that they are going to be handled by the server. It is a server responsibility to generate, to render this control. Okay, if we run this real quick, that's not going to show anything. Oh, it did. Oh yeah, the H1, right? If we look at the source code that comes from the server, we'll see that that label control, actually the server converted into just a plain old span. Okay, so that's how the server implements the label, right? Its own label. We'll see that there are other controls, for instance, the input field or the text box, right? And the text box could be implemented as a single line input field, right? Or as a multi-line text box, right? Text area, right? But from ASP's point of view, it uses the same exact control, text box, right? Where a single line, right, is just a special case of the more generic text box, which will be multiple lines, right? We'll see that in a minute. Okay. So this label, right now, it's not showing any data, right? Notice that we only see label and, I'm sorry, the H1 label, which is this over here. But this label is not showing any text. We could use the standard way that we know how to add content, right? We would just say here, this is a label. Right? If we render again, there it is. This is a label. We can see the source. Notice that it renders it as a span, as a plain old span, with the content embedded, right? We can add other things. We can add IDs to uniquely name or uniquely identify these controls. Okay. Right now we don't have any need for it, right? If I say my label, right, it just renders as a plain old ID. There it is, ID my label. Okay. But it's definitely needed if you need to programmatically refer to it. Right? Maybe I want to programmatically set the value of the label. I want to dynamically set the value of that label as opposed to hard coding it over here. Right here, the content of that label is hard coded. It's always this is a label. Right? Instead, what I want to be able to do is to compute that. Right? Maybe this label is the total value of my shopping cart. Right? And it's a total it's a cumulative summation of all the items in my shopping cart, and multiply by the quantity, and once I know the value, I want to display it in this label. I want to programmatically do this, right, as opposed to hard coding it. So to do that, we can let me extend this. Let me start a brand new one. We can do it in several ways. All right, let me introduce yet another topic here. We can use it by introducing an event handler. We can say page load. We can say, hey, on page load, when the page first loads, this is what I want to do. For instance, if it's a shopping cart page, when you load the shopping cart, what does it do? Oh, it goes out to the database, retrieves all your items in your shopping cart, right? It iterates over them, right? It calculates the sum, and it gives you, here's the total sum, right? Well, we need to be able to encode that, right? We need to be able to detect when the page has initially loaded, right? So that we can run this algorithm, right? Well, to do that, notice that at the top of the page, .NET gives you a script tag. You see that? Here's where you can encode, put all your code, right? All your logic of what to do when different things happen, right? For instance, if they click on, remove item from the shopping cart, then I need to recalculate the whole thing, right? If I increase quantity, I need to recalculate, right? If I first load, I need to retrieve the data and calculate. So I need to be able to handle all these various events that the user generates, right? As the user interacts with the page, I need to be able to react to all these all these events, right? So the simplest of events is when the page first loads. Right, that's the simplest of events, right? So to be able to react to this first event, ASP.NET provides us with a function that will be called when this event happens, right? And the way you can program that, you can say the function is called, it's protected. Can't type today. Protected. There we go. Void page load. Page load is a very well-known event, right? It's a very well-known event in the framework, right? In the ASP.NET framework. When the page first loads, it will call this function. It will execute this function, okay? And it will tell us who's generating that event, which we're not going to use this. And it will also give us some information about the, any arguments that might be passed. We're not going to use those. But one of the things we might want to do is to dynamically, say we iterate and calculate the total amount in our shopping cart, and I want to print it. I want to display it dynamically here in this label called my label, right? Notice that right now it's not displaying anything, right? It's not displaying anything. If I render this, empty. It's empty. See that? But I can programmatically from my page look and say, hey, that label, there it is. Look at that. My label is available right in this function. See that? Right? As a variable. Right? I can say dot, and then there's all sorts of attributes that I can modify. I can say, hey, label, I want to modify your text attribute. I want to modify the text that I want you to display. Right? There is. I can say text is equal to whatever. So maybe my shopping cart is that much. Okay. Now, right? If I reload the page and I reload the page, notice that that it didn't work. Which one am I looking? Oh, I'm sorry. This is 130. Let me run 130. There it is, 123. Right? Notice that this 123 is not hard-coded, right? It's not hard-coded in our HTML. It is programmatically being calculated. Well, in this case, it's still hard-coded, right? But it's hard-coded where? In the logic, not in the text, right? It is the logic that decides that the label should be 124 or 123, okay? As opposed to being hard-coded in the text, okay? So this might have been, right, the calculation of some values, right? We might say that we can say, we can create an array of prices, right? That might contain, several values. My items in my shopping cart, right? So these are all the various elements. This is what they cost, right? And we could iterate over that. Double. Oh, all right. Right, and we can calculate the total in that in my shopping cart. Initially is 0. I can iterate over the entire thing. Iterate I0 from I to the length of my array. Right, and then I++. And total will be incremented by, total will be whatever total is plus whatever the price is. Right, prices of I. So each price I'm adding into the total. So I'm totaling the total price, right? And now I can set the total. I can say the label, my label text is whatever the total is, right? And I'll put a $sign in front of it, right? Right. So if I run this, now that's become $114. So that's my total in my shopping cart, right? Okay, so notice that this has been dynamically calculated, right, as opposed to being hard-coded. Very good. So yeah, so we introduced page load, right? That's an event that gets invoked. Let's introduce a couple more events, right? Another event I might want to do is, as I interact with the page, as I click here and there on various buttons, right? I might want different things to occur. Okay, so let's do that. Let's introduce yet another one here. Let's say another form. This is experiment number 140, and this is the button. So ASP buttons. So here we're going to do H1, the button. So I want to introduce a button here and say, here's my label. I'm going to put a label here. And I'm going to give it an ID. I'll call this my message label. And it's going to run at on server. Okay. And then what I want to do is if I click on a button, I want to dynamically set that label as I click on the button. Right? So for instance, I'm going to call this my button. Right? And this runs at the server. And then if I just do that and I run this, it's just an empty label, right? An empty label that has no text, and then a button that has no text either, right? Has no labels inside, right? So let's add a text to that button. To do that, we can use one of the other attributes here to set the label of that button. So this is my button. Right, there it is, my button. And right now, when I click on it, it just reloads the page, right? It reposts the page to the server to be re-rendered, right? Or to be reinterpreted by the server. And what I want to be able to do is to programmatically set that message, right? I want to set that message. To do that, we can say, hey, button, whenever there is a click, when somebody clicks you, I want to invoke an event. Okay, so you can say create new event, right? And it creates a new function, right? A new method that will be invoked if that button gets clicked, right? The default naming convention for those methods is the name of the button followed by _click. Okay, so I notice that it adds for me a stub, right there is my button click, which will be invoked whenever I click on the button, right? So what I want to do in that button, well, I want to grab the message label, right, and I want to set its text to hello world. Okay, so let's reload that. Okay, so here it is, the page, right? Here's the page. If I click on the button, right, it goes and says hello world, right? So I have programmatically set that label. Make sense? Everybody good? All right. All right, let's expand this a little bit. Expand this a little bit, and let's introduce yet another component, the input field, right? Being able to render an input field where you can type text, right, and do things with it. So let's introduce the text box component, right? So again, so let's have here H1 text box component. Let's create the label again. So this is label, ASP label. ID is the label. So this is my message label. This is run at server. And it doesn't have any values right now. Then let's create a button. So ASP button that has the ID. Let's call it set message label button. So this is a set message button. It runs at the server. Has a text set message. And on click, I want to invoke. On click, I want to invoke a create new event, right? And finally, what we're going to do is we're going to allow you to type provide the text that I want to set the label to. Right? So as opposed to me hard coding the text that I want on that label, I'll let you choose what you want that label to be. Okay, so I'll put here a label, ASP text box. The ID, I will make it the message text box field, right? It runs at the server, and that's it. Okay, so if I render this, right now I just have the button and the text box, right? And notice that the that the label is not being, it's empty, right? So it shows label and then nothing. And if I click on the text message, other than the set message button, it doesn't do anything, right? Because I didn't code anything. I didn't tell it what to do in that event handler. So what we're going to do here for the event handler, we're going to say, well, grab the text from the text box, whatever they typed, and set the labels text to that, right? So I can dynamically set the label. So I'm going to say here, grab the message label, set its text attribute to be whatever the field's text is. Right, so I'm dynamically, right, setting the text to whatever you told me, right? I'm sorry? Oh, thank you. Field. Yeah, good catch. So let me reload this. Okay. So this is the text. If I say set message, notice that the label gets set to whatever. So actually, whatever I choose, it sets the label to whatever I choose. Make sense? All right, I think we have enough to build something very, very simple. Let's build a very simple calculator. All right, so let's build a calculator in terms of these three things that we've learned. Right, we've learned input fields, buttons, labels, and then event handlers. Right, so let's build something like that. Let's do a new form, and I'll say this will be 160 simple calculator. Right. So in that simple calculator, what we might want to have is simple calculator. We might have perhaps what? We might have two input fields for you to type A and B, right? And buttons to be able to add, subtract, divide, multiply A and B, right? And give me the results. Yes? All right, so let's do that. So let's first create the input fields for you to type the value. So here's A, and then here are the input fields, the text boxes for typing A. I'll call the text, this text box, I'll call it A field. And then I'll say that this is run at server. Break. And then I'll create another text box for B. ASP text box ID equal B. This is a B field. This is run at server. Okay. And I'll close that and do a break. And finally, we'll have C be the result of the result of adding or subtracting A and B. All right. And so what C will be, instead it's going to be a label. It's going to be a label. I'll call it C label. This is going to be run at. The keyboards are different on a Mac. Oh, did I spell this wrong? Label. There we go. Label server. There we go. Anything else? That's it, right? All right. And then what we need is the buttons, right? We need the buttons that allow you to add and subtract. So we'll add a button here, ASP button, and this will be ID add button, right? So this is run at server, and then the label that I want for that button is add, and then I want another button, ID subtract button, run at server text. Okay, make sense? Right? All right, so the buttons, I'm going to say, well, I'm going to create an event handler that says when these are clicked, do this. Right? So we'll say on click, if this button is clicked, I want to create a new event handler, and I'll say it'll call the function add button click. Yes. Whereas for subtract, I'll say that if they click and on click that to create another event called the subtract button click. Right. So I'll call those two functions, and there they are. There they are at the top. You see them, right? So on add button, what do we want to do? We want to grab the text for A, the text for B, right? We need to add them and then set the label C, right? So let's do that. So let's see, we get a string of A. So here's A as a string. Grab it from the text. Let's see, from A field, right? Grab the text, and then grab the text for B field text, and then add them. All right, so let's add them. So it'll be string C will be A string plus B string. Right, and then I want to set the label to be that, right? It'll be C label text is equal to C string. Yes, let's try that. That's 160. So let's do 160. Right, so if I do 12 plus 23 and I add, it's actually not adding them, right? It's concatenating them. It's concatenated because they are strings, right? That plus, it's really interpreted as a concatenation. So if we really want to do arithmetic addition, we need to convert these into numbers, right? So let's do that. Let's convert it into numbers. So we'll say double, A as a double. It'll be the conversion, no, convert to double A string, right? And the same thing for B. B as a double, it'll be the conversion of B string, right? And then C as a double will be the arithmetic addition of A double plus B double, right? And then C string will be what? It'll be the numeric value converting to a string, right? And one of the easiest way to convert things into a string is to concatenate it with an empty string, right? It's an empty string, and now we have a string, presumably with the result of having added A and B. Okay, so let's reload that. There it is. Now 12 plus 23 is indeed 35, right? For the subtraction, it's almost identical. Almost identical, right? The only thing that we're going to change is that instead of an addition, it's going to be arithmetic subtraction, right? So I'm going to do minus. So let's refresh, right? If instead I type subtract, notice that it does 12 minus 23 is indeed minus 11. All right, so it's working. Everybody good? All right. Okay. All right, so let's introduce yet another topic. Oftentimes you'll need to be able to respond not to events from the user interacting, but events that are being passed to you as parameters, right? Either from another page, right? As you navigate from one page to the next, right? Oftentimes you need to have these communicate, right? Obviously, one of the ways to communicate is to go to the database, right, and store some data there, right, and share it somehow. Another way to communicate is to pass parameters across pages through in the URL. Okay, so let's learn how to do that, right? To be able to extract data from the query string that comes in the URL. So let's do that. So 170. So this is the query string. So in our query string, one, parse parameters from query string. Okay. So what we can do, what happens is that ASP.NET provides a handful of objects, right, that exist by the time you get to your page. Right? Your page doesn't execute on its own, right? It's part of a much larger system, right? Much larger framework, right? That verifies whether you're logged in, whether you have access to different things, right? It verifies a whole bunch of things. So by the time you get to your page, right, you're executing within a much larger framework. So that framework, for instance, one of the things that framework does is reads this URL, right? Because obviously the URL is invoking something on the server. The server gets gets to take a look at this URL and parses it out, right? It reads it for you, right? And one of the things that it can give you, the framework can give you, once this URL has been parsed, it can give you the, for instance, the IP address of the original machine where this came from, right? Any header information that came along, any cookies that came along, right? Any query strings that were passed in the URL, the path that was used to access that page. I mean, there's tons and tons of data that the browser provides, right? You can look at that by inspecting the page, right? If you look at the page and you click on the network, right, and you reload, right, you'll notice that right where the page was first requested, you can see what was sent over, right, to the server. We'll see that this is the address, the URL that was sent, whether it was a post, and down below you see all the headers that were sent over, right? Any encoding, any content length, the content type, the origin where it came from. I mean, there's tons of things. It also even says what browser I'm using, right? All this information is being sent over to the server, right? And you can access it from your pages through a wonderful object called the request object. Right? The request object encapsulates all this data into a nice single object. Right? It also provides an additional object called the response object. The response object allows you to do the inverse. Right? The request represents everything that came from the browser. Right? You can look at who's querying this. Right? But the response allows you to, like the word suggests, it allows you to respond, right? To generate a response back to the client, to the browser, right? And the response is already being used to send over just plain old HTML, all this static content, right? It's being used for that. But you can programmatically use it to send individual pieces of text. Okay. First, let's look at the request. Let's look at the request. So for instance, we might display just a request object. Right. Notice that it gives you the instance. The instance says I am of type request, right? And that's a default string representation of any instance, right? Is a class that was used to instantiate this object, right? We know that it's of type system web HTTP request, right? So there is an instance. Something that one of the things that is available, one of the things that is interesting is anything that gets typed beyond the query string, right? There's this question mark at the end of the URL, right? So if I say message hello, right, it gets passed. The request now has access to that message I just sent. Okay, so notice that it's still there. Right? Hello. Right? But the request is not showing that. If I want to be able to view those query parameters that are being passed to the page, I can use the square brackets syntax, right? That allows us to very quickly, very easily extract those parameters that came to the page, right? So we can retrieve that message that is being passed, right? That's the name, right? Message. There's message. See that? So the message, right? That's the same name here, the same type. So anything in the query string is available through this map in the request, right? So if we reload now, notice that it says hello, right? And anything we type over there, so hello world. Right, there it is. So anything I pass along in the query string, right, is available through the parameters. And I can have several of these things, right? So for instance, I might say that I want to my cart, I want to add a product is shoes, and I want the quantity is that I want these 3 shoes, right? And the model is whatever. Okay, and I can notice that to pass those parameters, we use the ampersand, right, to delimit all the parameters I'm being passing over. So I would like to be able to extract these things. You know, product. What else? What else? Product, quantity, and model. All right. So let's do that. Let's extract the product, the quantity, quantity, and the model. Now if I refresh, there it is, right? I was able to extract the product that you're asking for, how many you want, and the model number, right? I was able to extract it. All right, so yes, so we can retrieve things from the query, okay? Another wonderful object that is made available to us is the session, right? The session object, right? So there's three very important ones: the request, which we just played around with; the response, which I believe we looked at on Wednesday. We played around with the response, and the session. Let's look at the session. The session is very, very important. What the session allows you to do is be able to remember, right? Remember information, you know, from one request to the next. Although we kind of said that we have that already, don't we? All right, let's look at the session on how it behaves. Right. So let's create here another experiment. 180, right? 180. Session. Here's a H1 session. Okay. We already saw examples where we typed something in a text box, right? This is run at server, and we're going to give it an ID, and this is message field. Okay, if we run this, we already seem to notice that if I type something, right, and I submit, I'm submitting, right? Notice that I'm submitting by pressing enter, right? The default is that when you're filling out a form and you type and you press the enter key, it submits the form, right, to the server. Notice that it's remembering already. It looks like it's already, you know, we have all the state information, statefulness that we will ever need. But what happens if somebody reloads the page? If they reload the page, all the information is gone. You see that? Right? Right? So we need to be able to distinguish. We need to be able to distinguish. Oh, actually, before we look at session, I think we should look at something before that. Yeah, no, let's not do session just yet. Let's do is postback before we get to session. All right, let's do is postback first. I'm sorry. Let me stop that. So let me insert 175. Okay, let me do new. What form will do 175, and this will be post back, or is post back. Right? It's often the case that we want to be able to distinguish on whether this is the very first time you come to the page, right? Or, right, because notice that as we interact with the page, right, when we click buttons and whatnot, right, the page is being posted, right? The page is being reloaded, correct? Right? But it's being reloaded for a different reason, right? It's being reloaded because I interacted with the page, right? Because I clicked something, I did something, right? As opposed to this being the very first time that you come to the page. Yes? Right? The very first time the page gets loaded, obviously. But as I click on the button, the page also gets reloaded. But it's often the case that we want to be able to distinguish between the two. Is this the very first time, or is this, you know, consecutive a post that you have been submitting afterwards, right? For instance, what we might want to do is that if this is the very first time that you come to the page, well, that'd be a good time for us to set up things, right? Maybe hit a database, right? Render the page in its first configuration, right? Set everything up. Once it's all set up and you start interacting with us, we might not need to set up everything again, right? There's no need for us to re-render everything or reset, rehit the database and retrieve things, right? We already have all that information on the page, right? So yes, we like to be able to distinguish between the two, right? So to be able to distinguish between the two, .NET provides, or I'm sorry, ASP provides a flag, right? A Boolean flag that is either true or false, depending on whether this is the very first time you come here or whether this is a, you're posting back again, consecutively. The flag is called isPostBack, right? And it's false if it's the very first time you come in, or it's true if this is several times you've come before. So let's play around with it. Right? So let's put a label here, an ASP label, and we'll do this and say this is a message label, and this is run at server, and then a button, ASP button ID message button on that server, and then the text, the label, post back. Okay, there we go. All right, now if I run this, notice that the label is empty. Label has no value. And whenever I click, notice that this is reloading. You see that the page is reloading, it's being reposted. So there's a difference between me coming to this page for the very first time and I click there, right, and the page loads, as opposed to clicking on the post back, right? Notice that if I refresh, everything's fine. If I post back and then I try to reload, it asks me, is this your intent of posting this back? Is this what you really want to do? Right? And I say, yes, I want to post back. This is not the very first time. I say, yes, continue. So yes, I like to be able to distinguish between these two programmatically. So let's do that. So what we're going to do here in the script, we're going to use the page load event handler. So protected void page load that gets invoked, object sender, and event arguments e. What I'm going to do is that it's the variable isPostBack is one of those magical variables that get instantiated for me by the framework, and in this case it's a Boolean. It's set to true if this is many times if you've come here before, or to false if it's the very first time. All right, so we're going to do here, if is postback, there it is a variable. What we're going to do here is that it means that you're coming back. This is this is not the first time you're coming here. Is that you're coming back through a post, through a button, or clicking enter. What we're going to do is that we're going to say the label, the message label. We're going to set the text. We're going to set it to hello again. Else, what we're going to do is we're going to say the message label is going to say hello for first time. Okay, so presumably the first time we come to the page, it'll say hello for the first time. If we post again, right, it'll say, oh, hello again. Right, so let's try that again. Let's try that. So there it is, hello for the first time, right? And if I click on this, meaning I either navigate to the page, right, through a URL, right, or I actually type it, or by any means I come here like this, it just says hello for the first time. But if I click on postback, notice that it says hello again, right? Now we can distinguish on whether we are in a conversation, right, or this is the very first time that you come here, right? And you can either load resources for the page to render the page. Make sense? Everybody good? Right? Okay. So yeah. So let's go back to the session example that I had earlier. Okay. So let me copy the labels. Here. Okay. All right. So what I want to be able to do is, let's look at that label first. Let's look at that label first. Okay. In my page load, let me copy this from the page load let me show you here. Obviously, if I hard code the label, the text, right, and I say hello world, obviously that's what the label is going to show. It's hard coded, right? So let's run that. So the label shows hello world. There it is, hello world, right? And it's always going to be hello world, okay? Because I am programmatically, logically, always setting it to the same thing. Yes. Well, oftentimes we want to be able to remember things, right? So one of the things that we can do here is we can use what is called a session. We can store things in the session. We can store a message into the session. We say, hello everyone. Right, we can store that in there. Okay, let me run that. Notice that the label is empty, right? Because we removed the hard-coded setting of the label, right? Okay. What actually happened was that just this session got executed, right? That's all, right? Now, if I remove this and I comment it out, I can still retrieve that session information. I can retrieve it. It'll stick with me for quite a while, right? We can say message label text equal to whatever I had stored in the session. Or whatever I had stored in the session. Now it's complaining because the session can store anything. It can store strings. It can store object instances, collection of objects. It can store anything, right? Well, actually not true, not everything. It can store everything that is serializable, right? Serializable is a term that says that you can represent a piece of data in a format that can then be reconstituted in its original format. It's an initial state, right? So for instance, a string, right, might be a series of characters, might be a series of zeros and ones, right? That can be unequivocally converted back into the original string, right? Or a character or an integer, all the primitive data types, right? Strings, characters, integers, doubles, right? All those are primitive data types. Those are all serializable, right? By definition, okay? They can all be converted into a stream of zeros and ones that can be then reconstituted into the original format, okay? But objects are not necessarily, right? Objects that obviously are written in terms of other primitive data types, they themselves are serializable. Okay, right? Because I am a class that is written in terms of serializable objects or instances is itself also can be serialized. It can be written into a stream of zeros and ones, and then it can be reconstituted into its original form. Okay. But there are objects or classes that are not serializable, right? Things that you cannot reconstitute, right? Things such as, a file handle, right? If you have a reference to a file, or if you have a reference to a database connection, or if you have a reference to a network connection, those things cannot be reconstituted. Okay, they're volatile, right? They come and go, right? You're not guaranteed to have access to the same exact file handle, right? That because you're interacting with other systems, right? And those cannot be, they are not serializable, right? But most everything we're going to be using, at least in this class, is serializable. So anything that is serializable can be put into the session, right? Objects, list of objects, collections, all sorts of things, right? All right, anyway, since anything can be stored, session stores a very generic type, which is object, right? Object is a very generic type. You need to cast it back. You need to cast it back to the original type that we have put in there. What did we put in there? A string, right? Well, if we want the string back, we need to cast it back into a string. And now we're okay, right? Let's run it. If we refresh now, we'll see that the string that I had stored in the session, right, I was able to retrieve it from the session and set the label back. You see? Now, I might have taken a little bit too long, right? Sessions have a lifetime, right? They will eventually time out. They won't be remembered by the server forever. Okay. What happens is that the server, writes into its memory that it's remembering something about that particular user, right? This information, I'm storing this information temporarily for this particular user, right? So it has to remember, it needs to be able to identify you against other users. You know, it might be thousands of users that it's interacting with, right? It needs to remember each one's information, right? And the way it does this is that the server sends back a cookie to the client, to the browser, and says, hey, so that I can distinguish you from everybody else, right? Well, actually, you can also use on the page. It can set the state there, right? So they can distinguish you from other users. And that identity is what allows it to know, oh, this is your session, and this is your session, and that's your session. All users have different sessions, right? Now, many people consider applications like this that the server needs to remember stuff. They're often considered to be non-scalable, right? In that, you know, if you have, it might work for dozens of users, hundreds of users, but what about thousands of users, right? Your server is limited to how much it can remember for so many users, right? So oftentimes developers prefer to write applications that are stateless, right? Meaning the server doesn't need to remember anything about anybody, right? The state is maintained by the client. The client identifies itself, says, oh, it's me. And then the server says, oh, okay, it's you. It's the very first time that I know it's you. I'll go and fetch all the data that I need for you, because it's your shopping cart, right? It's your account. But I don't remember anything about you. It's you identifying, okay, I'll use that to query the database. I'll have all the database, the data, and I just show it to you, right? For instance, all our applications up to last week, right, were all stateless, right? Up until we saw Passport. When we saw Passport, that was the very first time we introduced session information. Everything else before, the server was not maintaining any session, right? The URL, right? The URL said, I want this data. The server went out and fetched the data and displayed it, right? Where was all the data stored? In the database, right? The server wasn't remembering anything. You see that, right? You identify what you wanted. The state was fully identified by the URL, right? Right. That's what we call a RESTful call, right? The URL uniquely identifies the state of your application. No one else needs to know your state, right? The server looks at that state. It goes into a database, right, and retrieves all the information for that particular state and hands it over to the client. The client re-renders your page. This is the very first time that we're looking at sessions. Sessions, again, many developers prefer to stay away from sessions because they might be less scalable, right? You need more RAM on your computers, right? You need more, more CPU. Maybe you need several servers, right, to work round robin to be able to handle these kinds of things, right? Anyway, let's play around with session. Yes. In RAM, yeah. So it there's several strategies, right? By default, is in RAM, right? It'll make a piece of it'll allocate memory space in RAM, and it'll say, okay, this is for that particular user. It maintains a table, right? So in RAM, it maintains a mapping between user and memory space that is for that particular user. Okay. If that memory is too big, right, it can also be configured to use a hard drive, right? Meaning store the session information in a database, right? So go and fetch it from the database, or it can be configured to use a file system. Write it out to file system, right? And read the session information from a file system, right? Oftentimes, if you are in a round robin architecture where you don't have one server but you have multiple servers, right, that are sharing the same session, I mean, what would happen if you're interacting with a server, right, and you're going through a long process of adding things into the cart and things like that, and you're conversing with a particular machine, that machine dies, right? It goes down, it fails, right? So another machine has to pick up your conversation, right? So you need to set up your architecture to be able to have different servers be able to support this, right? And share the session amongst each other, right? And say, oh, that machine went down, and I need to pick up the session from that machine that went down, right? And the session is stored in the database or file system or somewhere shared amongst multiple machines, right? It can be configured as sophisticated as you want, but by default, it's just RAM, okay, in its simplest form. Okay. All right, so yeah, so eventually this times out. Yes. Yep. Right. So it's a technology that we were using all the way up to for the last month or so. We've been using stateless applications, right, where the state is maintained on the client, right? So the task of maintaining the state is offloaded. The server offloads this task to the client. It says you maintain the state, right? So every time you come to me, you have to tell me what the state is, right? Who you are. You have to identify yourself, right? What page were you looking at, right? What information were you asking for that page, right? And then the server looks at this state and says, oh, okay, I need to go and fetch all the data that is needed to reconstitute that state, okay? And I'll re-provide all that information and re-render everything I need for that particular state, right? So oftentimes it's called URL rewriting, right? Especially it's very useful if people turn off their cookies. If they turn off their cookies, how do I remember anything about you, right? So what servers do is that they encode the state in the URL, right? So any URL that is being rendered by the server, right? In that URL is encoded the session, some kind of session ID, right? Whatever was going to be stored in the cookie, right? So that when you click on the URL, now you're providing that information whenever you click, right? Whenever you post, whenever you click on a URL, right? That information is being provided to the database, to the server. The server can then map that session ID, right? And then reconstitute your session, okay? Your state, right? Yeah, the default way of maintaining session is the cookie. Right, that's the default behavior. If you turn off cookies, if the browser turns off cookies, it'll fall back onto URL rewriting. Yeah. All right. Okay, so it's there now. Usually, you start your session when you log in, right? You log in. I know who you are, right? As long as you're perusing through the website, through the public access to the website, I don't need to know who you are, right? I don't need to maintain a session for you, okay? But once you do log in, I might want to store a session for you. Now, if you explicitly log out, that's a good time to clear out the session, right? There's no need for me to remember anything about you because you logged out, right? To log out, right? So notice that if I refresh, this still works. Yes, this still works. Or I can explicitly throw out everything in the session. It says I want to forget everything, right? So I can do session.remove all. What that does is that anything that I was remembering, poof, it's gone, right? It's kind of like a log out, right? I log out. Right, I log out and I just want you to forget me, right? There's no need for you to remember who I am anymore, right? So if I reload this now, notice that the label doesn't render anymore, right? There is no message for the label; it's gone, right? Now, more often than not, people just forget to log out, right? They don't even click; they don't bother clicking on the logout button, right? So for that. Typically, these sessions are have a time to live, right? Meaning after a while, right? After seconds, minutes, right? Usually 10 minutes, sometimes 30 minutes, maybe time enough for me to go to the bathroom and come back, right? I'm still logged in, right? eventually the server will invalidate that session and says, okay, that session is no longer valid. I'll just remove it. And if somebody tries to maintain that conversation, I'll just flag it as I don't remember. I don't know who you are, right? So the session has timed out, right? That's also for security purposes, right? That somebody can hijack somebody else's account, right? So anyway, so let's build something in the session so that I can store things that I want, you know, programmatically. So for instance, let's have the label, right? Let's have, let's break here. Let's do a break. Let's create an input field, ASP text box, and I'll give it an ID. This is the message that I want to remember, message field. And this is run at server. And okay, and then I want a button. I want a button that says ASP button ID remember button. So the remember button will store something in the session. Right, we'll store something in the session. So the text will be remember, right? And then I'll put another button to be able to forget. We'll put two buttons, one button to remember and one button to forget. So forget. Forget. Okay. All right. And so right now we don't have anything in the session, right? We don't have anything. Let's actually remove this. Right. So there it is. So if I click on remember or forget, right, nothing's happening to a label, right? So what we're going to do is that we're going to do the following. Notice that it seems that it's remembering. See that? Because I'm clicking on this, and the input field. You see the input field is being loaded. But if I click here, right, it reloads and everything's gone, right? Anyway, so let's see. We'll do an event handler for each one of these buttons, right? We'll do for the remember, we'll say on click equal create new event, and then for this one on click equal forget. Okay. So on the remember button, what we're going to do is we're going to take the in the remember we're going to take the text, right, in the input field, and we're going to store it in the session. So we're going to do session message is equal to the message field, right? We'll put it in there. And by the way, we are wait a minute. Right, and on the forget, we're going to do the inverse. We're going to say session dot remove all. Okay, and when we load the page, oops. Actually, right here in the remember, what we could do is immediately set the label message label to text. We'll set it to whatever the session message is. Right, whatever it's there. We'll initialize it. And here, when it gets cleared, we need to cast it, right, to a string. And over here, we're going to clear out the text. I'm just going to say null. Okay. And finally, what we're going to do is that if the page gets reloaded, we're going to initialize the label, right? We're going to initialize to whatever the session was. Okay. So let's do that. Let's refresh. Oops. Uh-oh. Oh, I need to cast this. There it is. So right now it's not doing anything. It's not remembering anything, right? Remember me. So I click on remember, it sets the label, right? And if I refresh the page, notice that the label is sticky, right? It stays there, right? I can click on this, I can refresh all I want, right? It doesn't go away. Unless I click on forget, it's removed from the session, and now if I reload the page, it's no longer there. You see that? All right, so I can have the server remember anything I want, right? So not only can we have the server remember just plain old texts, right? We can have this the session remember all sorts of things, right? Like for instance, a shopping cart. Let's build a very simple shopping cart. Okay, so to build a simple shopping cart, let's build first an item, right? A shopping cart is full of items, right? So let's create a class that can store the information about a particular item, right? So we'll have here maybe let's store in app code. That's where you should store all your C# classes and data models should be in here. And I have here I'll create a directory here for oh, let me stop this. I need to stop this. I'll create a directory here for this particular class. So this will be CS5610. And in here, I'm going to create a class. I'll call this item, or let's see, yeah, shopping cart item, right? So I'll just call it item. And in this item, notice that it creates a stopped out. I'm going to put a namespace just because I have several classes, several courses, and I need to put different things in different right. So I'm going to put CS5610, right? In that namespace, I will put the definition of this class. All right, so I have the item. So what in a shopping cart item? What do we have? Let's see. We have what are the properties of a shopping cart item? We have the quantity, right? So that's an integer. That's an integer. Oh, these are. Oh, I'm sorry. This is a constructor. Oh, sorry. No, not in the constructor. We have these are all public, integer, quantity, right? And we want a setter and a getter. What else do we want? A quantity. We have price, unit price, right? So public, and these are all double position numbers. So this is the unit price. Set and get. What else do we have? Maybe a description. So public string description. Okay. All right. And we have a default constructor, and we'll create one additional constructor called item that will allow me to create these things. Right? I can pass as an argument. I can pass in a description, string description, a price, so double price and integer quantity, right? And so I'm just going to copy these guys here. So this price equal price, and this quantity equal quantity. Okay. All right. So we have here our data model to represent an item in the shopping cart. So let's go back and see if we could store one of these objects in the session, right? So let's do that. Let's go back to our experiments, and let's see. We'll create an experiment here and say this is 190, and this is store item in session. Okay. All right. So let's see if we could do this. Let's do in page load. On page load, so we'll do protected when the page first loads, void page underscore load object sender and events arguments e. When it first loads, I'm going to instantiate an item, right? And so we'll do we'll create several products. Okay, so we'll do item. Wait, did I call it items or item? Did I use singular? I did use singular, didn't I? Right? All right, so it's CS5610 dot item. Yeah, it's singular. Okay. So item 1. So here's item. New CS something something item. So the description will say, I don't know, what do we want to put in there? I want to put shoes. And then the price is 123, pretty expensive shoes. And I'm buying 3 of them. And then and let's create another item, CS5610 item 2. So these are the shoes. Our shoes. These are what else we want to put in there? Socks. So new, and then it says my Red Sox. Is that how you spell it? No. How much are they? Huh? Okay, those are pretty expensive, and it's only one, or a pair of. Okay. And then I don't know, pants. UCS, blah, blah, blah. So these are pants, and they cost $34, and I want two pants. There we go. Right. So let's see. We want to store one of these. Let's store just one of them. All right. Let's see if we could store just one of them. All right. So we're going to do session item. I'm just going to store my shoes in there. Okay, I'm going to store my shoes in there, and I'm going to run this. Oh wait, I'm going to put here. H1. What are we doing? We're working on a shopping cart, right? Shopping cart. Are we shopping with 1P or 2Ps? 2Ps, right? Shopping. English is not my first language. All right, so I'm going to store shoes in items, right? So I'm going to run this, and shoes are going to be there, right? Okay, shopping cart. We didn't do anything. We stored it inside of the session, but we didn't retrieve it. So let's retrieve it back from the session. I'm gonna throw away this right here, right? And I'm gonna retrieve it. CS item, right? The shoes. Shoes in session. I'm going to retrieve it from session, and I called it what? Shoes, right? Is that what I called it? Shoes. And I need to cast this. I need to cast this, and the data type is CS5610 dot item. I cast it. Now that I cast it, I have it in memory now. I can render it, right? I can render it. Down below, I'll provide maybe labels for this, right? Maybe this will be the description of the item will be ASP : label. ID will be the description label, and this will be what? This is run at server. Okay. Then what else we need? Need price, right? So this is price, and the label is called price label, and run at server. And finally, we have quantity, right? Quantity, and this is the quantity label, right? Very good. So now what we could do is the shoe that we retrieved from the session, we can update those labels. We can say description label, set the text equal to the shoes in session dot get the description, right? And I can set each one of these, right? I can say quantity label dot text that I'm retrieving from the shoes in session. Oops. What am I getting? Quantity, right? Quantity. I need to convert it into a string. And finally, price label. I'm going to set the text to be price, shoes in session dot price, and add it to an empty string, right? So if I refresh this, oops, something went wrong. Null. Let me see. So did we store it? Oh no, it wasn't shoes. It was item, right? We stored an item, not shoes. Item. I hate computers. They're always right. Okay, there it is. Description, shoes, prices, quantity. So yes, we were able to store an object, right? Not only can we store an object, we can store a list of objects, right? Let's do that. Let's do that. So we can store an entire shopping cart in the session. So let's store. So this is 120. 200 is store list of items in session, right? So those three items, we're going to add them to a list. We're going to say a list of those things, right? Of CS5610 dot item, a list of those items, or I'll call it shopping cart. Shopping cart. New list of CS5610 item. And I can put stuff in there. I can say shopping cart dot add. I'm going to add the shoes. I'm going to add the socks, right? I'm going to add the pants in there, right? And now I'm going to remove that. And now I'm going to store it in the session. I'm going to say session. Session what? Session items. I'll call it shopping cart. Shopping cart, right? I'm going to put in there the shopping cart. Okay, so now the shopping cart contains what? A list of items, right? So let's run that. Let's run that. Well, it's not going to show anything, right? Because it's storing it in the session. We have to retrieve it to render it, right? So let's do that. Let's go back here, and I'm going to I'm going to remove these items. I don't need the items anymore, right? Because I've stored them in the session. They are in the session. I don't need them anymore. I'm not going to add to any shopping cart. I want to retrieve from the session the shopping cart, right? So let's do that. So there's my list. I'm going to retrieve it from the session. So this is going to be session retrieve the shopping cart, and I need to cast it. And it's the type is, that's the type, right? So I'm going to copy the type. There it is. I need to cast it. There it is. So now I have it back. It has been serialized into memory, and now I have deserialized it. Now I have it in the session. I have it reconstituted. So what's left to do is I need to iterate over this, right? I need to iterate over my list of items in my shopping cart. Let's do that. Let's use a table to render this, right? Table, t head. So I'm going to put some headers at the top. So this is going to be th, table row. Sorry, table row, and this is th, which I'm going to say that this is the description. So this is my description header in my table. Then I'm going to have quantity and unit price, right? Unit price. Actually, unit price should come first before quantity. Yes. And then the table in the table body, t body, I'm going to have a table. I'm going to iterate over the list of items, right? So I'm going to go to C#. I'm going to loop over all the items in the shopping cart. I'm going to say for var I 0 I less than shopping cart, shopping, what? Wait, do I have shopping cart? Oh, I can't iterate over that. Wait a minute. No, yes. Yeah, sorry, I'm gonna do this right here. I'm gonna do this right here. Right before I'm going to render this, I'm gonna retrieve the shopping cart. There it is. And the page load. Okay, so I less than shopping cart dot length. Or size, what is it? What? Count? Sort single. What is the length? Huh. Shopping cart dot. It's not length, huh? It's not size. This is when you know way too many languages and you don't remember which one. It's not count either, huh? Let me look it up real quick. C# list length. Size of list. Count. Dot size, right? It is, right? Why wasn't it given to me? Shopping cart list of items, session. It's always been size. Shopping cart. Wait a minute, let me see something. Blah, 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 blah. Session. Course. Dot count? Yeah, it's not giving me that either. Was it here? Oh, it is. Ugh. Sorry, it was right there. Okay, I++. All right, so as I'm iterating, I'm going to render table rows, right? One row per item. One row per item. So here's a table row, right? In the table row, I'm going to have what? I'm going to have table data, right? So for each property of the item, I'm going to have a column. So I'm going to have the description in one column, the quantity in another column, and the right. So I'm going to say I'm going to do what? I'm going to do shopping cart dot element at. Okay, so I could just put it here, right? I could say CS5610 dot item is so the current item that I'm iterating over is shopping cart element at the index sub I. I guess we could have used an enumeration to do this, right? Now that I have the item, I can display the description, right? And I can display the quantity, right? And I can display the price. Wait, is that the order? No, I think we said price first, right? Price and quantity. Actually, I can actually calculate the subtotal, right? The subtotal will be the multiplication of both quantity times price, right? So I can do item dot price. Okay, make sense, right? So all right, so I think we have enough there. Let's refresh our page. Are we looking at the right one? 200, right? Yeah. So let's refresh. Let's see if it doesn't blow up. There it is. We have a table with all the shoes, Red Sox pants, the unit price, the quantity, and the subtotal. See that? Of my shopping cart. I might, if I want to calculate the total, I might provide a running total, maybe a double total equals 0, and then calculate the subtotal out here. You can calculate it out here. Let's say double subtotal, right, is equal to that. Render the subtotal here, right, and calculate the total as the increment. It's going to be incremented by subtotal. Okay, so that in my very last row, I can say, TD, what, TR, T body, PR, right? T body, I'm doing TR, yeah. And I'm going to do TD, and say grand total, right? And I can render here the total. What do I call it? I forget. Total? Just total, right? There it is. So grand total is $2,500. Okay. All right. So how about being able to? Oh, it's 125 almost. So the interesting part is adding and removing things from the shopping cart, right? Where you have to retrieve things from the session, add things to the session, right? Maybe add a new item to the shopping cart, or remove it, or change the quantity. Every time you manipulate the session, right? You have to retrieve it from the session, do the changes, and then put it back in the session. Otherwise, the session would stay the same. When you retrieve it from the session, it is deserialized. You have a copy of what's in the session. You don't have a reference to what you have in the session. So if you manipulate it, right, if you manipulate it in code, you're manipulating a copy. You're not manipulating the original object in the session. Make sense? So we'll look at this on next Wednesday. You're retrieving strings from the session. You manipulate the session. You put it back in the session. Make sense? All right. Thank you. Remember, you should be working on projects and any experiments that it still applies that you're working on 5 experiments per week, yes? But those experiments should be based on project, right? So no one-off experiments here and there, or reusing my experiments or things like that, all right? The experiment should be exclusively towards working on completing your projects, all right? All right, thank you. Yes. Okay.
I'm doing everything in the database. So
what do you mean you're doing everything in the database?
As in the Mongo video.
Yep.
So the scheme which I have, like one user will have many artworks. And if some other user,
Yep.
I'm not able to get the idea of how should I go about storing this thing. So this is my main schema.
Okay.
And this is the artworks for
Yep.
each.
Exactly. Yep.
I'm not able to see how these things are going to work.
Okay, that's fine. Now, so this is what it's called an embedded schema, right? Mm-hmm. So you have an outer schema, you have an inner schema that is being used by an outer schema, the profile schema, right? It is perfectly fine. Now, it depends what you want to do with the artwork, right? If the artwork exclusively lives inside of the profile schema, right? Meaning there's no other place where you're going to access it, right? So for instance, if you have somebody's profile and it says you want to know all their portfolio, the art portfolio, right? If that art portfolio is only accessible through that person's profile, then this is fine. This is what you would do. I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
I want it to be like global thing, like displayed on the whole.
Okay, so you want to display all the artwork.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you do that, then artwork has to be its own collection.
Okay, and then I have to give the reference of this username inside that collection.
All right, so there's 3 ways of doing it, right? One of them is using the classical, where the artwork has foreign keys back to the owner,
in the Mongo.
like a relational, just like a relational database, right?
Okay.
That's discouraged, right? The other way of doing it is that the profile maintains an array of the IDs of its artworks, right? So it does not contain the artwork itself, but it has an ID of which ones they are. So you can always query, what is my artwork? So you want to be able to say.
So I'll have another collection of artworks, and I'll have the IDs of them.
Yes, yeah. Right.
That sounds.
Or you have a mapping table or some kind of association. This is if people are reviewing an artwork or they're they're commenting on an artwork, then you'll need some kind of association, right? Where you says, that user added this comment about that artwork, right? So you'll need so the comments are in this separate collection, and then you have links back to referencing each one of the instances. Okay, very, very relational kind of way, which is, again, that's kind of discouraged. We need to move out. There's a new classes coming in. We can keep conversing outside. I'm sorry? Will you be available today? No, not today. You can call me at that phone number I provided on my piazza. If it's about the project, and we can chat all you want. You can call me tonight at between 5 and 6. We can chat all you want. Okay. Yeah, not today. I have to go somewhere. Sorry? Can be serialized? Can't be. Network connection, network handles, file handles, database connections, anything that you're interfacing with other systems that you need a reference that is volatile, that will be garbage collected, will be gone, right? And once every time you instantiate it, it's really something brand new. I'm not aware of I don't. What I want to use in my exam. Okay, then you need to create Okay, so where do you want to grab the data from? From a browser or from a server? From a browser. Okay, where are you hosting your application? In our .NET application, in our machine, or are you hosting it in our .NET machines? Okay, so in .NET something, Net 4, the Net 4 machine? Yeah. Okay, so if it is using the Net 4 machine, you can use Professor Asala proxy. Right, so what the proxy tool does is that you send to the URL that you want to hit, it's not letting you through. Right, the one that will provide you with JSON. You provide it to Professor Asala's tool, which is another URL. The URL that has a parameter, you can pass it a URL. It will do the call for you. It will go out, right, using through the server, and then it'll come back with the client. And so, yeah. Which one's gonna? Which one can I use?
I don't know where he has the story.
That was there, but the other if you
Enter the web URL. Okay, so what URL do you want to go? Which one? No, that returns JSON. What's the URL? That's the one you want, right? Hard copy. Control C. Now how do I go back? What was it? Here? Like that? What's that? Well, wait a minute. We can just get the URL the other time. Wait, stop.
Oh. Are you,
Yeah, we'll copy the other way around.
you mean the machine, the portal?
Yeah, where is it? Yeah, so what you do is from your browser, from your page, or from JavaScript, this is the URL you need.
Oh, okay. I need to allow that URL.
Yes,
I like this one.
yeah, what you do is that whatever URL you want to go to, you embed it in these bars, vertical bars. See that? And then you pass it to the simple function that is again.
So the type is just not
Yeah, it comes back to plain old JSON. Yeah. All right.
discuss that same in the portal view medicine.
Yeah, I sent it to you.
You didn't send it.
We were working together. And
Yes, but I left and I think it's still in the draft. You said? I think you forgot to send that.
Maybe you didn't send it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll send it. Actually, I'll post it in the chat so everybody can see it. Everybody can see it. Yeah, what do we say, the 18th? That's Saturday.
was, I think, 25.
Yeah.
Professor Gopal something.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we agreed on the 18th. That's Saturday. Yeah. Well, that weekend I'm going to start grading. The weekend of the 18th, I'm going to start grading. It's going to take me 2 weeks. The 28th of April. No, this is the 18th of April. 10 days earlier. Yeah, the 18th will be done. Right? Yeah, I'm going to start checking on the 18th randomly. So it might be that I don't get to you. So you should keep working. There's no demo. You record a demo. No, I mean, there's no agenda. But, we visit and you put this the video so that making sure that we're not, overlooking anything. Okay? Go. Yeah. Well, it says that the server doesn't have the difference. There's a server, it's 1,000. Oh, yeah. Let's get to this side. Okay? And you can delete the server all the time. Delete API website. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
मेरे खर्चे का डिपॉजिट अभी अकाउंट में $35
I can't see anyone else. Keep going then. I used to spend more time in my hands because I have to learn. You can call me between 5 and 6 on your phone. Yeah. 25 seconds. You want to go? My line is you can only do 5 and 6. Yeah. And do that. All right? No, everybody else. You got this. Okay? You go to the restroom? I'll wait you outside. Night. The newer ones. The ones that I took it this time? They're gonna be cool. I don't know. You know what? They took it to just gonna sell you. Oh, yeah, huh?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Male. Yes. Yeah. For kicking it. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, 2 seconds.
But I love it here. Everybody's so nice.